The race is on, and the bombshell news that Christian Horner is out as Red Bull team principal, with Laurent Mekies installed to replace him, has sent shockwaves through Formula One. But why has the axe fallen on Horner, and what does it mean for the future of the team and Max Verstappen? I'm Edd Straw, and joining me to tackle the biggest story of F1 2025 yet are Jon Noble and Mark Hughes. Well, Mark, this is a big one, isn't it? How seismic is this bit of news?
Oh, it's huge. He's been there for 20 years and has created this colossus of a race team. And all of a sudden, midway through the season, he's gone. And it's if it was going to happen, you expect it to happen sort of end of last season because of the controversy of the texting. But he survived that. And the puzzling thing is the timing. So as yet, we don't know, or I don't know at the moment, what triggered that timing. But certainly it's a huge story, yeah.
Absolutely. And John, obviously, this is one of those ones that it's kind of a bolt from the blue in terms of the timing and it happening, although we knew this whole situation was bubbling under. So it's one of those classic big F1 news stories that just suddenly appears, which you don't get so often these days. So it's always one where there's always that sudden scramble and reaction, trying to find those shreds of information to piece together to get the full story.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of kind of Nico Rosberg's retirement after 2016, that some stories we kind of get inklings of, you get hints or rumours, even kind of speculation appear in the media. But on this, there was absolutely nothing. There was no hint. I think everything looked to be progressing as normal, and suddenly, bam! It's all happened. There hasn't yet been any kind of official, proper explanation about what's happening. So we're kind of trying to piece together the jigsaw, as invariably happens in this, and things will become clearer. But you could see lots of elements were falling into play that explained why it happens, but we don't yet know why the trigger was pulled at this point.
Exactly. And we're going to go through all those various elements during the course of this podcast. But before we get into that in depth, we are going to be recording a follow-up podcast to this, and we'll actually take questions from the Race Members Club for that. And we'll be doing that once the dust settles and there's been a bit more time for everybody to absorb it and a bit more to happen. So that should be released on Monday. If after listening to this podcast, you've got a question about this situation and you're in the Race Members Club, you can post it on Patreon. We'll have the normal post there about this podcast, so you can put it in the comments there and we'll go through that. So always best to listen first. You may have some things to pick up on that we talk about, or that you want a bit more on, or that triggers other ideas, or of course things that happen or are talked about publicly over the next couple of days. So we'll be delighted to have your questions there when we follow up on this. But anyway, John, we have got lots of detail to get into now. So what can you tell us about why Horner is gone and so suddenly?
Yeah, I mean, we still haven't spoken to the big Red Bull chiefs, so we don't know what the official explanation is for it. So all we can do is kind of piece together a picture of what's been happening and what we kind of best think are the circumstances. And I think primarily this revolves around performance on track, because this virtually decides everything in Formula One. If you're winning championships, delivering championships, you're pretty much untouchable. No one's going to replace a team boss in that situation. But Red Bull has been falling back, and its prize asset, Max Verstappen, has obviously been pondering what he does in his future. We've known that his camp have been speaking to other teams, primarily Mercedes. We know there's a performance clause in his contract which is coming up soon. Whether that was after Silverstone, which is halfway point of the season, whether it's July the 31st, whether it's summer break, we don't know. But it was imminent. So the most realistic picture that seems to be emerging is that the Verstappens have been made clear that they want to see something change at the team. They want to have a winning car. They want to have every reason to commit here. I think Max Verstappen would like nothing more than to win many more championships at Red Bull. But if he can't have that, he wants to win many championships for any team he can get. So if Red Bull was well aware that something had to change, if it went back, analysed the situation, kind of worked out, is it time to shake the tree a bit? Is it time to make a change? Are things not working? Has the loss of key figures like Adrian Newey, Jonathan Wheatley, Rob Marshall, has the performance on track? Is it heading in the wrong direction? Is next year's engine project not going to be a success? Have all these come together and delivered the conclusion that a change is needed Better to get that change done now than wait until the end of the year.
It does seem, Mark, very difficult to detach this sudden timing from the renewed Verstappen to Mercedes stuff, doesn't it? That does seem to be some leverage that perhaps played a part. And we know there's been some disquiet in the Verstappen camp about the kind of Christian Horner, Pierre Vacher as technical director alliance there. They perhaps wanted to break that up to get things done in the way they think it should be done. So do you think that could be the kind of main impetus for the timing?
It may be, and certainly that's the thing which has surfaced in terms of public statements and the various smoke signals. But there's also to consider is the political backdrop behind the scenes. And ever since the death of Dietrich Mateschitz at the end of 22, there have been factions both within the Austrian part of the organisation and between the Austrian part and the Thai shareholders, 51% Thai shareholders. So that could... We don't know what's been playing out behind the scenes there. Certainly the lack of a fully consistently competitive Red Bull will not have helped. But as for whether that's been the actual trigger, whether it's a contractual situation with Max, whether it's a further fallout from the departure of Adrian Newey, it's very difficult to call without some more information.
It's interesting, John, though, isn't it, that the statement was made sort of by Red Bull on the corporate level, and the Red Bull CEO of Corporate Projects and Investments, Oliver Mintzlaff, who effectively runs the Austrian side and the sporting arena. That's probably quite telling, isn't it? Because there was a point last year where it seemed like the Austrian side was maybe a little bit against Horner, but the Thai side saved him. But it seems like it's all come together now, and they've presumably all decided they want to change it. Is that a fair thing to infer from this?
Yeah, I don't think we've got, in terms of factions, that the Austrians wanted one thing this time and the Thais wanted another. This would have been discussed at proper level and an agreement reached. It was a very corporate statement, but it did offer some clues. Basically, it said that he was relieved of his contract, or relieved of his duties, which is as close as you can get to saying we have got rid of him. But it also thanked him for his contribution, which suggests there is kind of no kind of other outside elements they're not happy with, or all those elements. It was a very, very carefully worded statement on those two aspects. But it was the Austrians, let's not forget, who investigated last year the allegations made against Christian. It was all led by them rather than the team itself, and that's where the statement came from today.
Yeah, we should say that everything we're hearing indicates that it is about the way the team's working, about the performance and that side of things, rather than any of the other stuff that's been going on in terms of that investigation last year, etc. That's what it appears to be at the moment, anyway. But it's certainly a very sudden move, and you've got to say, Mark, I presume the positive for Red Bull is that it at least means this political instability that's been there for kind of 18 months there's at least a clean break and a chance for that to settle down, isn't there? Because I don't know about you, but you always felt that something had to change, and it wasn't necessarily it had to be this change, but something had to happen, because it seemed every time there was kind of peace breaking out, it was almost an uneasy truce that was never going to last.
Yeah, it wasn't a stable place. It hasn't been a stable place for the last year and a half, and of course with key, very important personnel departing, it only added to that feeling. So yes, I guess that's it's now cleared the decks, but now the challenge really begins, because he was such an intrinsic part of the success of the team for 2 decades. So yeah, so it's one thing making the change, it's quite another making the change work.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And we'll talk about Horner's 20 years at Red Bull and his legacy in the final part of the podcast. So we'll come back to that, and also a little bit of what to expect from his replacement, Laurent Mekies. But you have to say, John, that when a change like this happens so suddenly, it does wrong-foot a team a little bit, doesn't it? Ultimately, Red Bull's chances of hanging in there in the Drivers' Championship have faded, given Max Verstappen's now 69 points behind. So, as we talked about, that performance element, the fact that Red Bull is struggling and has been struggling for kind of 12 months now, just over 12 months, is probably the key element and the key catalyst in terms of this actually happening, because like we've said, if you're winning all the time, it's much harder for this to happen. So it connects it to all those concerns we've heard from Max Verstappen about the way the car's been developed for a couple of years now. Remember the stuff Jos Verstappen talked about the potential consequences for the team with what was going on last year. So it all sort of balls up from that, doesn't it? The exact way those threads are bound together isn't completely clear, but that's the sort of substance of it, isn't it?
Yeah, it does seem to be, and it's a hugely kind of tricky time for any team boss to come in now, because you've not only got the need to turn around the current situation, that it's clear the car has fallen a bit away from McLaren. It's clear that something's not working inside the system there. But then against that backdrop, you've got 26 looming. And not only have you got the challenge of leading a team into 26 and balancing the resources between 25 and 26, you've got this Red Bull becoming a works manufacturer team. So it's got an engine project to come in, which Christian Horner has led from the start. He brought the staff in. He's this was going to be his legacy to Red Bull, was this engine project and making a success of it. So you've got to try and plot that challenge. And if the performance isn't as strong as some people expect, and I think Christian has recently been kind of downplaying expectations, saying if we beat Mercedes, it'll be an embarrassment for them. So no one's expecting miracles from Red Bull next year. So Laurent's got a massive task to come on to turn around and sort things out this year, work out where the infrastructure weaknesses are, get Max on side and convince him that this is the right move for the future, deal with the 26 technical regulation on the chassis, and manage the engine project and keep all that together. And he's got to do all this during the space of kind of a 6-month period where you're juggling all these things. You're not going to be able to get everything done perfectly.
Yeah, very much so. And it's always a shock to a team when this sort of thing happens. And also, this is a team that's lost quite a few key people over the years. There's still a lot of very, very good people there, but a lot of those names who built it up, now Horner, Jonathan Wheatley, Adrian Newey, Rob Marshall, to name but a few, have all moved on. So it is kind of a team moving into a new phase, isn't it? But yeah, that's the really interesting question, I guess, Mark. How long has this been thought about? And is it basically as simple as, if we want to make sure we keep Verstappen, we make the change and then we try and sort everything out? It doesn't feel like a really calculated change. That's the thing. Although it's quite elegant with Mekies moving over from Racing Bulls, Alan Permain takes over as Racing Bulls team principal. Sort of sliding the pieces around feels quite nice insofar as it's not, someone's out and now we look for a team principal for 12 months or something. But it does also feel like we've made this decision. Here are the pieces we've got in play. We'll move them around to find the solution going forward. So that again feeds into that. This is quite sudden across the board rather than some long concocted plan, if you like.
It feeds into Team Verstappen. Team Verstappen want to see changes. Sort of he's Raymond Vermeulen, his manager, as well as Jos. Whether that's means that Max has agreed to stay on these terms, I don't think that's as clear cut. I think we might still be looking at the possibility of Max moving on if he doesn't feel that the team is going to give him what he needs competitively. But it's certainly the Red Bull organization showing willing to say, okay, you're not satisfied with how things are. Here's a major change, and we're going to try and restructure it around this. So at least they have something that they can show them that they've done. Whether that will be enough is one question in terms of retaining Max, and whether it will be effective is it's a huge season that they're going into. The first year is an engine manufacturer in a very complex new formula. You can't really look at Red Bull as anything other than an outsider. If you're looking at prospects for 2026, and so. Would Max fancy that? Maybe he does. Maybe he likes the idea of a clean sheet and just staying where he is and staying loyal to the team. Or maybe maybe fancies the new challenge and doesn't fancy the question marks that are around the team at the moment competitively.
If you were thinking strategically, John, as Max Verstappen, hanging around to see how next year starts and then potentially jumping off to whichever team and power unit looks like the good option for 27 would seem the kind of wise thing to do, wouldn't it? So do you think that's now the most likely course in terms of Verstappen now that this has happened? Just see how it goes, see if the team shifts around a bit to work the way you want it to, and then what your level of confidence is once the power unit hits the track.
I think staying in 26 was always the most likely option anyway, purely because of the huge uncertainty that's coming with the 26 regulations. I think you can listen to what Mercedes have been saying, or you could listen to what Aston Martin could offer you, or you could listen to what Alpine could offer you, or whichever any team could promise you the world. Say, we've got X in place, and this is how our engine's performing, and this is the results. This is the result that we think we can get. But it's all irrelevant because no one knows where they stack up against everyone else, and it could well be that if Max felt the Mercedes was the best option, moves there for 26 on a long-term contract, and then Red Bull comes up with an absolute blinder of an engine. And then it's dominant for 4 years. That's would be viewed as a very crazy career move. So I always thought the likelihood was of he stays at Red Bull into 26. George equally stays at Mercedes into 26, and then the proper driver market game would begin at Melbourne next year when we see how the competitive order stacks up. Because I can guarantee you that as soon as a clear picture emerges of which manufacturer is dominant, which team is dominant, then there are going to be endless drivers all trying to get into that seat, and they will be looking at ways out of their contracts. They'll be looking to kind of pull the plug on where they're at. They'll be looking to convince that team that they want a seat there. So the real game starts, I think, in Melbourne next year. And Red Bull's task basically is to convince the Verstappens and to get in place the framework it needs to make sure that in Melbourne next year, if it's not winning, it at least can give a platform to suggest this is the direction of travel we've got. This is why we think you should stay here. And maybe Red Bull's conclusion, the only way to do this was to make the change now and get in place and get the infrastructure maybe shaken up a little bit, get us some new ways of working, get the ball rolling in getting Red Bull back to the front properly.
Right, Mark, let's talk a little bit now about the future. Laurent Mekies has been team principal at the Red Bull second team, Racing Bulls, as it's currently called. Done a good job there. But what should we expect from him as Red Bull racing team principal, as he's now very, very suddenly become?
Yeah, I don't think we should expect too much too soon. I think he's a very capable guy. He's good with the people, and he will be able to lead the team well. But this is an entirely different scale of job to anything he's done before. It's not just running a little team. It's running an entire organization of 1,000 people and three big components. You got Red Bull technology as well as the racing team and Red Bull powertrains. And so it's he's almost playing 3D chess compared to what he's been, the 2D version he's been playing so far. But he's clearly someone who has got good communication skills and works well in a sort of managerial context. And I think as the teams have grown in size, so they evolved more towards this type of team principle. And I think Christian Horner was more of the old style of team principle, where they're just racing people, are independent, they've made their own way there, and they've got themselves in those positions. Slightly more individualistic style of management, let's say. So I think it'll be very different. I don't think we should be expecting, a root and branch change. I think it'll take him a time to get his feet under the table and understand how everything's working and understand what the challenges are and how he's going to go about addressing them. But I think it should be looked at as a very long-term sort of recruitment, really, and that's the competitive element as it hopefully, from their point of view, comes on song. Hopefully that will coincide with him getting a full feel for the demands of the job.
it's quite a seismic moment, really, isn't it, John? You could call it the next chapter of Red Bull racing, but really it's almost the next volume, isn't it? Because you've got this seismic change. The team principal, the founding team principal of Red Bull Racing, if you want to call it founding, obviously they took over Jaguar, so the team already existed, but he's out. You've got the power unit program coming online next year, so it feels like this is, at most, at the least, it's turning over a lot of pages, not just into the next chapter. It's a huge thing, and the decisions being made now will be the ones that decide whether Red Bull Racing is going through a bit of a dip and then it comes back, or whether maybe it just goes into a dip it never recovers from, because succession planning, and that's not just in terms of the team principle, but the whole thing in terms of the ownership, with the loss of Mateschitz, the loss of people like Newey, Wheatley, etc. It's quite a big break if you look at this period as this period of a few years in terms of the Red Bull that was before and the Red Bull that was after. So it could go either way, really, couldn't it?
Yeah, but I think, even before this news broke, it was clear that Red Bull was entering a decisive phase in its history. That the performance had kind of trailed off a little bit from the dominance of 2 years ago. It seemed to be on the way down. You'd lost Newey, you'd lost Rob Marshall, you'd lost Jonathan Wheatley. So some of the key pillars of success of the previous generation had gone. Then everything revolved around Max Verstappen. That he was the kind of the central element. He'd hauled that car to wins this season that maybe other drivers wouldn't have done. It was absolutely central to the car. If you had, two Liam Lawsons, or two Yuki Tsunodas, or Yuki Tsunoda and Liam Lawson in that second car, this is a team that would be towards the tail end of the Constructors' Championship, because the points contribution of the second car has been absolutely minimal. So this was the precipice the team was on and risked if it lost Max Verstappen. And there were a few people in the paddock last weekend at Silverstone suggesting that if Max did go, if Max said, "Oh, I've had enough, I'm out of here," was that the end of the Red Bull racing that we knew? Was this a team that would then, not slide down to obscurity, but fall off the cliff and have to rebuild everything again completely? So I think this is kind of what brought everything to a head, that the team had evolved. You'd lost the staff. Max Verstappen's place in it was absolutely central to its success in the future. The uncertainty of the engine project. This was a time, these weeks were always going to decide Red Bull's future, and Red Bull's taken that and made its decision that it thinks is best to secure it.
But of course, the interesting thing, Mark, although there's been this change now, the die is pretty much cast for next year, isn't it? The power unit program has been working away for a long time, and a lot of elements of that are set. Obviously, the car's been in development for some time as well, so it's not like it's a reset, is it? The 26 Red Bull scenario will still be the kind of Horner era Red Bull, won't it? Just in terms of what they've got on track, because there's quite a big lag. This engine development started a few years ago.
Yeah, in terms of the material that will hit the track in Melbourne, nothing changes, absolutely nothing. This is just about how the team will be run, how it will be led, and what the style of management is going to be in terms of, we talked about before, the Austrian element of it. How involved is that going to be? All these things. What would Laurent's vision be? What people does he want around them to progress the team from here? And also, of course, what bearing it has on whether Max wants to stay or continue. So yeah, all those things are all it's about. It's nothing materially changes in terms of the hardware that's going to be on the grid next year.
Just looking at Mekies at Racing Bulls, John, what have you made of him generally? Because he's not had a huge amount of time there, but he does seem to have had a clear effect in that team and fitted in very, very well with it too.
Yeah, I think he's made the right calls. He's not someone who is hugely high profile in the paddock, kind of in front of TV cameras, or screams, gives us headline quotes and everything. He's just someone who quietly gets on with the job in a very effective way. He's shifted the identity of the team a little bit. He's brought in experienced hands like Alan Permain, Tim Goss, helped kind of evolve the facilities in the UK away from Bicester, and now they've got the facility on the Milton Keynes campus. So lots of things just ticking away quietly, and just the direction of travel seems to be moving forwards. Because there was a time where Red Bull were clearly questioning the value of their second team that it was effectively losing the money, so it didn't really make much sense. Whereas, the bottom has been reached. It's pushing forwards. It's still a long way to go before Racing Bulls can talk about rivaling McLaren and Red Bull, a Ferrari, Mercedes regularly, but it's pushing there into Q3 sometimes. It has some star performances. It's moving forwards slowly. And I think from Mecca's perspective also, he's obviously well adept at dealing with the Red Bull politics, knows how things work internally. So at least he's not jumping into an environment of both a new team, kind of new challenge of being an engine manufacturer, and also trying to understand how Red Bull politics work. Because I think he's well ensconced in it. And, dealing with the Austrian factions, dealing with Helmut Marko, for example, those problems won't be there because he's not trying to convince people. He's already operates with them, knows how they operate. They like how he operates, and that will help this transition move forward as quick as possible.
Mark, we should talk about Alan Permane, who's been appointed team principal at Racing Bulls as well. Obviously, vast amounts of F1 experience. Started at what was then called Benetton back in 1989. Was at that team pretty much forever until he was ousted in the middle of 2023, and he's been at Racing Bulls since 2024. You couldn't ask for someone with much more experience and knowledge, could you?
No, top guy, very, very committed, very hard work, and very, very intense in a good way, competitive way. It's a big step up for him also to be in charge of an entire team. But I think of all the environments that he could step into for that role, this is perfect for him. I think he'll do a good job there.
Absolutely, and obviously still Peter Byers there as CEO, so Permane will very much be focused on the sort of the racing side, and that's very positive because he's got a very clear way of doing things and has already had that effect. So continuity as well. So it's there's not a huge amount to say about that point because it's just very, very sensible and logical, and that will be as seamless as it can possibly be, and everyone will know where they stand. So a very, very logical choice there. I think the second team side will be much calmer than what's going on in the Red Bull racing world. Right, let's now, Mark, get back to Horner's legacy. Look at his 20 years there. What will his legacy be? How will we look back on what he's done at Red Bull, and how critical has he been to the success that team has had?
A remarkable story, really. He was in his early 30s when he was sort of given the keys to the entire organisation, effectively. He said, "You're all right, off you go. You run this team that we've just bought and see how you get on." And so with only a little bit of experience, he only recently started running his own team in Formula 3000, had a lot of success there. But this was an entirely different scale. But he's a very racing savvy, I guess you'd call him. He was... He's smart, he's street smart, and he knew he needed to surround himself with good people. You had Matisic providing the budget, and with Marko as a sort of coordinator between Matisic and the race team with Horner running it. And there was an implicit power in everything Horner wanted to do, in which he utilised it. And as well as just establishing a very sound foundation in terms of the simplified way the structure he had of running a race team. It was just like an extension of his F3000 team, and got rid of some of the managerial layers that were at what was previously been the Jaguar team. Made it a much more straightforward operation. As well as that, he began a campaign of recruiting Adrian Newey, and eventually it paid off with a little bit of help from David Coulthard. Which is Horner's initial signing of a driver, and it really, it built from there. And as soon as we got the change of formula for 2009, and Adrian could really work his magic, then they were off and running, and that was just the beginning. It became the dominant team of the next 5 or 6 years, and it's had 2 periods of domination, of course, one with Sebastian Vettel and one with Max Verstappen, and that's that it shows it wasn't just a flash in the pan. There was real depth and quality there, and it's as the challenges of the expanding F1 have changed, so it adapted. But even as it did that, Horner was absolutely instrumental in keeping it a nice, simple, straightforward racing team in terms of the people that are doing the work at the track and in the factory. So that I think Horner gets a lot of the credit for keeping this thing, getting it up and running successfully in the first place, and keeping it on the rails despite an awful lot of challenges thrown at it, and to just come in and take on giants like Ferrari and McLaren and subsequently Mercedes. It's just from an independent organization. I think it's quite remarkable, and that was basically him.
I think it's easy to forget, isn't it, John, how Red Bull and Horner were perceived early on, in that they took over a team that was struggling as Jaguar. I think people underestimated what was going to be possible for that team, and that wasn't the expectation, that within 5 years they'd be winning drivers and constructors championships, and they've won 124 races since then, the fourth most wins in F1 history. So that's probably the comparison point, isn't it? To say, well, the empire he leaves has had a huge amount of success, but the one he joined was almost nothing and didn't have a huge amount of respect even in the F1 paddock.
Yeah, it initially started out as the party team that everyone talked about. The music in the pits, and the drivers would have to be seen at parties all the time before. Lewis Hamilton's famous remark about it just being an fizzy drinks company that, even last weekend he said he admitted that he regretted saying that at the time, because Christian made Red Bull a powerhouse in Formula One. 2 periods of dominance, and he made that team, completely ruthless racing machine, and that every single aspect of the job of being a Formula One team was taken to the limit. They would push the technical regs, they would push the pit stop times to the max, they would push the politics, they would push the complaints against other teams, they would push the FIA. Everything was taken to the limit, because that's the way to win in Formula One, and that's what Christian Horner did so well. He understood who he needed to be friends with in the paddock. He understood who he could kind of trust and who he didn't need to trust in the paddock. He was quite adept at dealing with the media. He mastered a lot of skills, plotted himself quite well through all the Red Bull politics. I think up until the time Dietrich Mateschitz died, which kind of will be viewed as perhaps the starting point of, this fight for control, a power battle, and an internal civil war that's kind of plotted its way and ended up with where we are today.
Yeah, it always had the potential to lead this way. I guess, Mark, the question will be whether in the later years, whether Horner bit off a bit more than he could chew, perhaps, in terms of consolidating his power in the way he was doing things. And I can see some people arguing this is his comeuppance for that almost. Do you have any sympathy for that particular argument?
Well, I guess we'll get to find out as next season unfolds, and we get to see what the power unit is like. But in terms of trying to expand his area of control, I think that's was probably a reaction to the corporate moves that were happening after Dietrich's death. So I don't think that was a sort of a pre-planned strategy, if you like. I think that was a reaction to the unfortunate event, and we'll get to see the full effect of that latter part of his tenure in next season, I guess, and the seasons which follow.
And I guess, John, another thing that people often talk about is the relationship between Horner and Helmut Marko as well, because Marko was the long-established guy at Red Bull, wasn't he? He knew Dietrich Mateschitz very, very well. He's still there in that Red Bull motorsport advisor role and holds a lot of sway. So what role do you think that dynamic played in the build-up of the team, the way the team went about things, and also perhaps what we've seen over the past 18 months as well?
I think there was from Christian's perspective, there's both a good side and a bad side to having Marko around. On the good side, when it worked, it brilliantly gave a kind of a good sounding board into Austria and Dietrich Mateschitz. It kind of was a good buffer point, good communication point, kept everything on side. And there was also, I think, also an element that, in terms of, Helmut had this reputation of happily being brutal with drivers, happily phoning them up and telling them they were sacked, happily doing all the bad points of being a team principal, which Christian didn't especially like, I don't think. I think he liked making decisions for success, liked making decisions to do things that helped win, but I don't think was ever a big fan of some of the not well-liked aspects of being a boss. So in Marco there, they had a kind of good cop, bad cop way they could deal with things, which on some levels worked well. But equally, I think it also led to some confusing aspects about Red Bull, because I always found it absolutely remarkable that it was the only team on the grid that would brief against itself. That you have teams, you look at Zach Brown and Andrea Stella, you looked at Toto Wolff and Niki Lauda when they were together at Mercedes, you looked at Ferrari, often, well, not often, all the time, there was unison amongst them that they would support each other. They, admitted that when they made mistakes, they make mistakes as a team, that we're all in it together, and they work together and complement each other. Whereas Red Bull consistently would have this situation where you'd have Marco speaking out against the team to kind of German media or Austrian media or Dutch media, and briefing against kind of Christian or the Red Bull teams. Just this remarkable dynamic in the end, which kind of will feed politics into the system, feed friction, and I think it was quite hard to control. So that relationship, when it worked, was brilliant, because it helped take away some distractions from Christian they didn't want to do. But equally, I think it proved potentially poisonous in the end, especially when we got to the point of the kind of the fight for control and this internal civil war. And when you've got the factions of Horner, the camp of Verstappen, Marco, the Austrians, the Thais, I think it then became very difficult, because there wasn't a unified Red Bull. There was a Christian Horner's perspective on things and Helmut Marko's perspective.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. A very, very strange team in that regard. And some of those ingredients you'd normally expect would be a recipe for disaster, but it was made to work, which is what makes Red Bull so unusual. And of course, looking forward, we've mentioned the power unit program. There's a new wind tunnel coming. So you'd have to say, Mark, that also Christian Horner leaves Red Bull in many ways in quite a healthy state, doesn't it? Certainly in terms of those facilities and the potential it's got, no longer enthralled to whatever engine supplier partner it can find. It's got full control. So it has gone from that fizzy drinks manufacturer into being a full works integrated Formula One team. And that, I guess, is something that Horner can look at in the coming years and say, well, that's something I built. I'm sure he can take quite a bit of credit for ongoing success.
Yeah, that's very true. It's changed in scale. I think they wouldn't have done that if Honda hadn't decided they were pulling out, which has subsequently changed their mind about. But I think they would have been quite happy to stay as a customer of Honda. There were frustrations being a customer of Renault because they didn't feel they were as committed as they were. But with Honda, they were the perfect partner in that respect, and it's just they were almost, obliged to sort of take control of things themselves once Honda had announced they were pulling out. So it may not have been a strategic plan. I think it was probably a reaction, but yeah, it's there in place now. And if you were looking at the ideal scenario, you'd always want to be in charge of your own destiny. You wouldn't want to be hostage to whatever was going on in one of your key partners. So yes, that is part of his legacy, but I think it was a reaction. So yeah, it's all. A lot of this change has been initiated by events, and I think this is just the latest one. And I think a lot of controversy was sucked into the team at just the time it could least withstand it. With the controversy with the Christian got involved in with his ex employee coming at the same time in the wake of Dietrich's passing. So it's always like outside events that have sort of changed the direction almost.
Yeah, absolutely. Something had to give, didn't it? And I guess there was always a good chance it would be Christian Horner. But John, just to finish off, let's get completely speculative. Now, normally when we talk about things that might happen or have been talked about, it's sourced, there's foundation from it. But I know I briefly mentioned this to you earlier, but I was just thinking, we've got an Alpine team that needs a team principal. We know Christian Horner's got a reasonable relationship with Flavio Briatore. There's obviously the question of what's the future for that team, etc. Only 51 Christian Horner, something like that could appeal. So just thinking, I don't think I'd be certain we haven't seen the last of Christian Horner in Formula One, and that seems like a pretty good, elegant, potential way to get back on the bike and build up a team, perhaps even take full ownership, full control of it. That's the kind of level that you'd imagine someone like Horner will be looking to play at. He won't be going cap in hand to people looking for a team boss role, will he? Can you see something along those lines happening that I've just, as I stress, completely just imagined as a possibility just because of the way that the board is laid out right now?
Yeah, I can't imagine Christian Horner viewing today as his final day in Formula One. I think he's been around too long to walk away. I think he will feel he's got plenty more to offer. And I think there are two options here. One is that Alpine potential scenario. Question is, would he want to get involved in something that could be more political and a bit more kind of a corporate mess at the moment, with the uncertainty about this Renault CEO's future, where the direction's going, team that's coming from the back. It's a huge challenge and something to weigh up. But I think the other thing that cannot be discounted now also is Ferrari, that we know that John Elkann, was eager last time around to get Christian. He visited his house, I think the summer of 22, to try to convince Christian to come on board. But at the time, Christian wasn't interested. He said, no, you don't want to speak. You don't want me. You go and get Fred Vasseur, which is what happened in the end. But then you do wonder now, it popped up a few weeks ago, the suspicions maybe that Christian, is happy to fuel these latest Ferrari rumours because it strengthened his hand that, if there's a risk of him going, then maybe Red Bull will feel that, well, he'll just end up at Ferrari and end up beating us. So probably best to have him on board. But now you just wonder that, maybe Elkann will have a quick chat to see what's going on. We know there's been these kind of the questions and rumours surrounding Fred Vasseur. A lot will depend on how Ferrari's rest of the season dictates. What are things looking like for 26? Have the foundations been laid in for next season? So I think what will happen is Christian will sit back for a while, take stock, look at things, and just like we're going to have on the drive market, that we come out of Melbourne next year with a clear direction of travel in terms of, for drivers, that is the car I need to be in for 27. I think there will be teams that go, we need to make a change here. There's a team boss, very capable team boss sat on the sidelines. We need to go after him and make a change. So I think we'll have these two narratives that will kick off in Melbourne next year.
Yeah, there's going to be plenty more talk about this, I'm sure. But hopefully we've given everybody a decent overview of what we know at the moment. We're going to keep finding out more, so I'm sure we'll have plenty more written and talked about, whether it's in podcast or video form, over the coming days from us. And as a reminder, we will do that follow-up episode where we take questions from the Race Members Club. So head to Patreon, find the post with this podcast in it. You may be listening to it through that. Stick your question in the comments and we'll answer as many as we can in that podcast, which is due to come out on Monday, unless any more bombshells are dropped in the world of Formula One. So thanks very much, John and Mark, for scrambling for this impromptu podcast. And as I always say, we'll be back soon with more from the world of Formula One.